right, now these are the formulas for the z-score. We do have two different formulas for population and sample, but they are identical. If you don't pick the right one, you're still going to get the same answer. So we take our score, we subtract the mean from it, and then we divide by the standard deviation. So remember, population mean is mu, population standard deviation is sigma, sample mean is x bar, sample standard deviation is s. So let's say we wanted to figure out where you fall for your age in this class. So let's say the mean is 21 and you're 18. So 18 minus 21 is negative 3 divided by the standard deviation. Standard deviation is 1. That would give us negative 3. That means you're way at the youngest end of the class, depending on how this works out. So that's what the z-value is telling us. It is very easy to calculate. It's not difficult at all. And it is extremely beneficial for giving us an indication of where you fall within the blob. All right. So here we have our Red Fox front foot length tracks again. And we have our mean and our standard deviation that we calculated in the previous two classes. So I have 3 tracks. The one that's 2.25 inches, the one that's 2.35 inches, and the one that's 2.4 inches. Where do they fall relative to this blob of fox tracks? Where do they fall? So what we're going to do is we're just going to plug these into the formula to see where they fall by using the z-score. So 2.25 is my score, minus the mean, divided by the standard deviation, we get negative 0.9716. That means that that track is 0.9716 standard deviations below the mean. So it's not that far. One standard deviation is not a huge distance, so it's not that far away. 2.35 minus the mean divided by the standard deviation. That track is a little over half a standard deviation above the mean relative for front foot length. And lastly, 2.4 inches minus the mean divided by the standard deviation. This one is 1.3 standard deviations above the mean. Do not let this intimidate you at all, because, I shouldn't say that. This is as easy as it looks. There's no hidden anything in this. You just simply subtract 2 numbers and divide it, and then you're done. There's nothing else. You can't make a mistake on this if you just take your time to do it. Any questions on the z-score? As I said, we will use this for the entire semester. Except for section 2, we won't really talk about it. Okay, next. Quartiles, deciles, and percentiles. So that you can understand this a little easier, I tell a story for this, and it should be a little bit easier to understand. Back in the early 90s, there was a convention in northern Vermont that I wanted to go to. I found out about it in the 80s, and I really wanted to go to it. I didn't end up going until 1992. So this convention was in a convention center that's on 800 acres of land in northern Vermont in a town called Barnett. It's in the middle of nowhere. The nearest halfway decent sized city, which is about the size of Canandaigua, is St. Johnsbury. And it's about 20 or 30 miles away. So people from Europe and all over the United States every year back then went to this convention. And I wanted to go. Now, because most of the people that were going lived at a distance, pretty much everyone flew into Burlington, and then they were bused to Barnett, where the convention center is. Now, the reason the convention center is where it is they wanted to completely remove people from their normal lives. It's basically that way whoever was running the convention could have your undivided attention, right? Back then, there were cell phones, but there's no way you're getting a signal there. There were no outgoing telephone lines except for emergencies. So you couldn't be like, oh, can I use the phone? I got to call home or whatever. No, you couldn't do that. So you're completely removed from the real world. So I decided to go. I drove 7.5 hours. It was through the mountains. It was gorgeous. I was one of like only a couple people that drove. The rest of the close to 100 people flew. So I got there. It was like a 6 or 7 day event. I get there Friday at like 2 o'clock in the afternoon. The first thing that we were going to all do as a group together was dinner, which was at like 6 o'clock. So they showed me around the place, and showed me where I'd sleep and all that, and said, come back at 6 o'clock, we'll have dinner. So I go back, and they have like a kitchen that's attached to a cafeteria area. So you go in, you get a plate, and you kind of slop the food on whatever you want. It's kind of like a buffet. And they had very specific instructions. Do not start eating because someone from the facility is going to give you a welcome speech, and then you can eat. So we all go out. It's like probably 80 people, maybe a little more than 80 people. We're all sitting there, all have our food. Guy from the convention center gets up, starts talking, very short, welcome, all that kind of stuff, and enjoy the food. So simultaneously, 80 of us take our spoons and jam it into the food and put it up into our mouth, and then almost simultaneously, 80 of us almost vomit on our plate. It was so disgusting. It was almost like the food was bad. Seriously, that is how bad it was. Now, you will come to know if you haven't, because I think I mentioned this a little bit, my hobby is traveling. I love to travel. I travel all over the world, as much as I can afford and as much as I have time to do. Have you ever seen that show, Bizarre Foods? I eat all that stuff. No insects. I don't eat insects. But the idea is, if I'm in a country, I will try whatever it is they eat. If they eat something that's really bizarre, I will try it. Sometimes I hate it, sometimes I love it, but I will at least give it a try. No insects. I came this close to eating a Cajun deep-fried grasshopper once. It was like here, and I just couldn't do it. So no insects. This food, by far, was worse than any of the food I've ever had. So I am thinking, oh my God, I'm going to lose like 20 or 30 pounds. Which was okay, right? It's kind of like I could market this as some sort of diet program. But I was still concerned. So I go to bed, wake up in the morning, granola. Can't mess that up. That was okay for breakfast. So then I find like an employee. I grab them. Not really, but you get the idea. Where's the closest McDonald's, right? Oh, St. Johnsbury has a lot of fast food restaurants. I'm like, yes. How far away is that? 30 miles or 20 miles. I had 45 minutes for lunch. There's no way I was going to make it there and back. I did all the calculations. It wasn't going to happen. So I figured I'm going to drive into Barnett. There's got to be something. So I go into the main town. There's a post office that is half the size of this room. And there's a general store that's the size of this room. So I walk up to the door. It's like this old rickety thing made out of plywood. It's got a hole where you can see someone kick their foot through the bottom of the door. It opens, and inside, it's like a little mini Wegmans. There's all these aisles, right? And right in front of me is an aisle of potato chips and junk food. I'm like, saved, right? Because no matter what, I could get a different flavor of potato chip for each lunch and get something to drink. So I look at that. I move over one aisle. The beer aisle was next, right? They had beer, and the weirdest thing, they had a huge section of sake. Never could figure that out. So moved over to the next aisle. Cowlicks, grain for horses and cows to feed them. All your horse and cow needs you can possibly imagine. Right next, one aisle over from the beer. And then the last aisle was all hammers, nails, bolts, nuts, screws, all that kind of stuff. And that's it. So I'm like, okay, back to the junk food. So literally, I grabbed bags. Oh, and then they had a cooler section that had cold beer in it and soda and stuff like that, sports drinks. So I had all these bags, and I'm just about to go to the cashier. In the back of the place, not spelled correctly, I might add, was a piece of plywood hung up on chains that said submarine sandwiches. So I drop all the stuff, I go back, and they had cold cuts and cheese and veggies that looked pretty good. Now, there are cows right outside the door, so it could have been like 5-minute-old cold cuts, right? So I opted for no meat. So I got a cheese sub, what was it, foot long, nice big sub. They wrap it up. No matter what, this has to be better than the food at the convention center. So I have my sub, I grab a liter of soda, set the sub down, set my soda down. Now, here's the kicker. 2 sawhorses, piece of wood that looked like a door across the top of it for the counter, and one of those old cash registers that if you push the button, the little thing pops up like this.